Okay, credibility was the other item that he wanted to consider when helping build this decision grid over here. So looking at credibility and how do you rate someone's credibility. That's a tool. So basically a complex scientific topic plays right into the hands of the brain's weak points. The author uses a credibility spectrum tool to avoid getting sucked back into the trying to decide who is right and who is wrong. And this is emphasized throughout the book. You don't want to get caught up in this slanging match. You want to be able to place someone on a credibility spectrum as the author does. So here's a credibility spectrum, just an example of his own personal one. Here's more credible statements, less credible statements, and he places associations, individuals, papers within this spectrum. So professional organizations might be here. Organizations that contradict their normal bias might be very high as well. Government reports are fairly well credible. Professionals, yeah. University research, yeah. And then down the bottom of the barrel here we have petitions and, you know, the layman, you and me, right at the bottom. So this is the credibility spectrum that he uses. He makes a point, that it's his, but you have to create your own. And here's the important part: made without regard to any particular statements on climate change and based on your own criteria established ahead of time. You really need to build this up first and foremost as a prerequisite before you can go in headlong into a debate on climate change. So let me get back out of credibility. Okay, so where are we? Who is saying what? So a really brief overview, if you will, of some of the main contenders in the debate. We've got the doomsdayers that are saying we're all going to hell in a handbasket, and then some of the conservative opinion that suggests that nothing's really happening at all. Where are we at? Well, the National Academy of Sciences are really credible on his spectrum, and they say the threat of climate change is real and increasing. American Association of Advancement in Science saying that Greg, the author, rates them as a highly credible resource, and he says, well, they say, the American Association say, the longer we wait to tackle climate change, the harder and more expansive the task will be, with a mounting toll on vulnerable ecosystems and societies. And then the book also outlines a number of other sources that are highly credible that state that climate change is real and we need to act. On the flip side of that is the conservative kind of argument. The American Association of Petroleum Geologists, their credibility is okay. Greg admits that they're scientists, but he also admits and suggests that they have maybe an inbuilt bias because they risk losing their jobs if they say too many things that are bad about fossil fuels and whatnot. They state that global warming is real, but not all agree of what and who is causing it. And then Greg looks at other sources within this debate, on this side of the debate, and he finds that generally their credibility is fairly low. They're not peer-reviewed. The petitions with poor control, so a lot of petitions go floating around, but they've got poor controls and suspect participants, and there seems to be inherent inbuilt bias in a lot of the argument made on this side of the defence. Again, that was really brief. Apologise for that, but time doesn't permit. So if I can look at now the central argument. So why has this come up? I'm sure you've all heard some of this discussion before, but it's worth repeating, I think, in this context. The central argument, Earth carbon levels, and the author uses a lovely thing called a planetary bathtub to show the carbon levels. So the crux of it being that pre-industrial revolution we had 280 parts per million around 1860. Current levels are sitting at 390 parts per million. The considered opinion there is saying that maybe the human safety level is actually below where we're at now at 350 parts per million. And here's the scary thing: business as usual. And you might have seen Al Gore on a stepladder here. Business as usual at year 2100, the bathtub's going to be full at 900 parts per million. So that's the predicament that we may find ourselves in, and then we ask, well, how are we getting there and why is this happening? Okay, so what's coming in here is carbon gases and greenhouse gases. Yes, they're good. Water, methane, obviously probably the nastiest there, and CO2 is all natural occurring and needed for life, but too much of a good thing is not good, states the author. And to emphasize why we've got in this problem, he calls it the Great Carbon Transfer Project. Here's Biology 101 in 13 seconds or less. Plants take in CO2, they split it, and then they combine it with water to make itself. So this is how plants originate and grow. Coal is really just old rearranged plants, and oil is just old rearranged plankton. It's a big deal. So we've got those two items, yes. What we're doing, and this is what he refers to the carbon transfer project, is, well, let me read the words. The crux of the matter is that we are taking the carbon that has been stashed away underground over the past, was that 300 million years? Wow. And burping it back into the air over the past 200 years. On a geologic timescale, that is a blink of an eye. And so to repeat, we're really taking all these plants that have been lived, died, and now sitting under the planet, under the Earth's crust, and we're digging them up and reburning them in a blink of an eye, which took over 300 million years to occur. So this is why this tap is starting to be turned on a little bit heavier, and we're filling up the bathtub. A concept that a few people may not know about, because it's not the sexy part of the debate, is carbon sinks. We have those are naturally occurring. The ocean, for example, takes a fifth of all carbon gets dissolved in the ocean, which is an amazing amount. There is a question, though, that if the ocean becomes saturated, a fifth of all carbon no longer can be absorbed. Where does it go? So we might find that there's a tipping point, if you will. The ocean says no more thanks, and then we're left to handle a fifth of all carbon getting spewed more back into the air. Great. Carbon sinks. Another one, big one, is trees. They absorb CO2 when they grow through this process. The biology lesson that we just had just then. Yeah, but when we cut down and burn them, we get twice as bad an issue. So we have carbon sinks naturally occurring, but the sink's not letting out enough for what's flowing in. That's the crux. Here's another idea that comes out of the book, which is really the scary part of the current science, and what makes warmers hysterical with dread, so Greg says, is the feedback mechanisms. And that is when we get a higher temperature, things start getting in motion that just kind of feed on themselves. So when we have higher temperature, we get lower photoplankton, which absorbs CO2. And when we have lower photoplankton, that increases the higher temperature because we have less CO2 in the air. Additionally, similar concept. With a higher temperature, we lose reflecting ice, from Greenland and from Antarctica. This decreases, which then heats up the planet, because the term is the albedo effect. It reflects sunlight back into space, so it doesn't heat up the Earth. But when there's less snow, we get higher temperatures, and this kind of thing goes in a really nasty loop. These feedback mechanisms are really scary. One of the scariest things of all is that most of the climate models leave out feedback loops because they are not well enough understood. That's going to keep me up at night. It means that they may be a tipping point just around the corner, which we don't know about. And further to that, because there's so many unknowns, scientists go back in time, not in a DeLorean, but they look through sedimentary rock and ice and all the rest, and they see some startling things. So, for example, 14,000 years ago, Greenland warmed by 20 degrees Fahrenheit in just 50 years. Now, that's ridiculously quick. So it suggests that our climate has a hair trigger, and that one that can set off huge and sudden swings and change overnight almost. 50 years is just a blink, if that, on the history of the planet. And so what we could be doing is the climate could strike at any time, and we're not really prepared for that. Yes, he's getting very hot and agitated. Look out. Okay, so skipping back to, that was the central argument. There's the context, so we've covered those topics. And the last one that I wanted to cover off is the author's conclusion, what conclusion he drew. And this is no Sixth Sense twist at the end. I'm sure you may have predicted that column A is where the author fell out, and his point here is that he's confident that the bottom row is much more likely than the top, and a bottom right mistake is much worse than the bottom left one. So really, in essence, he's saying this bottom row is much bigger than this one, and the probability of this row happening is very high. And so he's going to select A because B is not even worth thinking about. And just to go back to the original grid, so he's moved this line up somewhere to here, saying this is the box now, not this one, if that makes sense. So the probability is higher, so let's act and do significant action now. So he makes a call to action to the reader. It's clear to me that the best bet, the most conservative, careful bet, is to avoid any chance of ending up in that bottom right corner, and I have to agree with him. And this is you. He says, please use the tools in the book to draw your own conclusions, emphasize your own conclusions, and then spread the word targeting multipliers, whether that be website gatekeepers or politicians, being able to amplify your voice in this debate. if I can go back to the final diagram, which I really liked, and this was him saying that here's a stable climate, here's modern prosperity. We have all these things, yep, cheap energy, medical, high yield agriculture, natural resources, financial system, all underpinned by this stable climate. And you can see how precarious we are. If we take away this, our entire modern prosperity can go that way. The last word from the author: will we rise to the greatest challenge in human history, to be wiser, better than we have ever been, to choose the act rather than be forced to act? Well, that in part depends on what you do next. Tag, you're it. Okay, well, that's the book. Let me see if I can squeeze all this into, so that's the book. What's the worst that could happen? As I said, one of the best reads, if not the only read you need for climate change debate and to go into a confident discussion on this issue. I hope you get out there and read it. Okay, until next time.